You're watching All About Money on HKIBC. I'm Isabel Wong. Well, the departure of female talents from businesses in Hong Kong is costing the city dearly. And in other words, you'll want to start working on keeping your female talent around. That's according to the Hong Kong Female Talent Pipeline study developed by the University of Hong Kong and Meraki Executive Search and Consulting. Large organizations in particular face the largest loss of female talent at the top level, while losing senior leaders will cost companies more than $500,000 each. Just how serious is this problem and what are the ways to tackle it? Let's bring in Kathy Ladd, Meraki Executive Search and Consulting Executive Director. Kathy, thank you so much for dropping by, and what a wonderful research that your team has done there with HKU. But do tell us, what are some of the key findings? What are some of the most alarming problems that your team has spotted?
Thank you, Isabel. It's great to be here. The report was fantastic because, of course, it had a number of fascinating findings that we came through, having conducted it over a number of months. But the three top findings for us were, first of all, from a Hong Kong perspective, the average in terms of female participation at a senior level, the average is too low and it's not acceptable. Large companies in particular losing huge numbers of women as they go through their career. At the entry level, we're currently at 53% participation. At middle management, it drops to 41%, but at senior level, it drops to just 29% on average. But what's most alarming about that particular finding is most companies don't even realize they have a problem. It's almost acceptable and okay for it to be so low. Another really interesting finding was the companies, less than half of the companies were not even tracking the data. So they didn't even have an idea as to where the problems were and where they needed to fix. So that's a really interesting finding, that the data itself wasn't really being tracked in its entirety. And then the third interesting finding was the fact that so many large companies were actually losing women more than small companies. So a big percentage of the organizations that we got data from were large companies, and they were losing the biggest percentage. And those women were going to smaller, more agile startup businesses, SMEs. So there were three key interesting findings.
As you just mentioned, in this part of the world, most markets, they are only at the beginning stage in terms of, say, driving a more inclusive work environment. So in your view, like how are, say, markets in this part of the world doing compared to those, say, more developed economies, or even in the global markets? How are they doing at the moment?
So Hong Kong is lagging behind, and we've been involved in gender diversity in the corporate world for over 10 years, 15 years. And in Asia, we've been driving this agenda for over 7 years. And the needle has only moved ever so slightly. And the best statistics we can work with are really women on boards, to be fair, because that's where we have the most visible statistics to be able to measure. So from a Hong Kong standpoint, we're only really at 13.9% of women on boards, which is poor compared to Singapore, which has exceeded that. Even India, which 2 years ago were behind us, are actually ahead of us now. Places like Japan have a long way to go. China is ahead of Hong Kong. So from a women on boards perspective, we're still lagging behind. But the important piece is, what can we do to change this? And the talent in Asia, the talent in Hong Kong is incredible. It's not a case of women aren't available. It's not a case of women are not willing to or want to push ahead in their careers. It's really about finding the opportunities for them, and companies being more courageous about how they recruit and how they promote. And we're a huge advocate of hiring for potential. And men are always hired for potential, whereas women are always hired for attainment. So what have you achieved? And then you get progressed. Whereas men, if you have the potential to do more, they get pushed forward. So we need to change that dynamic, and that narrative needs to change within corporates, because it's still old style business practices that need to change. So once we start hiring for potential, and once we start promoting for potential, that gap is going to change, and hopefully we'll see a big difference.
Yeah, another interesting trend that your report has pointed out is that 54% of women reach the undergraduate level in Hong Kong, but there's only 29% of representation in terms of the senior management level of women. So, in your view, what's stopping women in the city from taking the top jobs?
So when we did the report with Hong Kong University, in addition to taking the data and doing qualitative interviews with 200 companies, we also interviewed 100 women. And these were women at different stages of their careers. They could be stay-at-home mums, they could be CEOs, they could be women in senior leadership, they could be women on boards. So it was a real range of women. And what was really interesting from their feedback was you'd expect one of the reasons or one of the barriers stopping women from progressing is probably family commitments. It's one that you hear all the time, but that was probably number 4 or number 5 for many of these women. The number one response we got was lack of opportunity and stretched opportunity. So these are women who want to progress, but they're not finding the opportunities within their organisation, or they're being looked over for these opportunities. Which is disappointing because, of course, these companies are trying to find ways to retain these women, yet these women want these opportunities and they're not getting the chance. So that's one problem. The other area is, of course, flexibility. You know, we live in a world where agility is seen as, you know, the way forward. You know, we're 24/7. How we work, where we work and when we work should really be our choice. If we're not given more options, women will choose to leave to join those more agile organisations. So I think it's important that we think about the corporate setting, the structure of work, and how we allow women more control and options around how they want to operate. And then we'll continue doing a great job.
Welcome back to All About Money. 9 out of every 10 Hong Kong women have reported barriers to reaching their career aspirations, citing reasons from a lack of promotional opportunities to the burden of family commitments. And it does not help that Hong Kong has some of the longest working hours in the world, with an absence of flexibility at work. While this is a time when female professionals would like to have it all, what are the ways they can navigate through life and work with grace? Still with us is Katie Lett, Meraki Executive Search and Consulting Executive Director. Katie, in the first half of the program, we talked about some of the most common problems female professionals would face in Hong Kong, in this city. But one of the reasons why they might be feeling a bit deflated at work would be that they don't feel valued or respected enough. But what are some of the strategic ways of asking, say, hey, work, you need to respect me, you need to value me, because we cannot just go to our boss and be like, you need to respect me. So how would you advise professionals to make a strong argument at work in order to feel more valued?
I think it's less about us as individuals being asking to be more valued. It's more about organisations and leaders creating a culture of inclusion. When we go to work, we put our heart and soul into what we do. It's really important that we are valued for that, and therefore it's important for leaders to create an environment where we can be authentic, we can come to work, we can show up the way we want to be. And that's not just gender, that's all groups of all diverse groups. Everybody should feel safe and feel they should be in a place where they can be honest and open and challenge the status quo, and not feel by speaking up or speaking out of turn is going to have an impact negatively on them. So I think it's more about creating a culture of inclusion where people feel they can be themselves, and when that happens, you feel valued. So it's less about us, it's about creating the right kind of environment for us to work in.
So obviously, many people, flexible workplace is no longer a taboo topic in many Asian cities, but still, like, there are some talents who are too afraid to ask for flexibility because they are worried about losing their job or even credibility at work. So in terms of negotiations for more flexibility at work, would you have some advice for them? How can they really ask for that strategically?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it is a problem, partly because the tone has to be set from the top. culture change, mindset change only takes place when leaders own it. And therefore, it's all well and good saying we have a flexible working policy. You can work from home. You can have shared paternity leave. You can, all these incredible things that clearly is supposed to help drive some kind of culture of inclusion. But the reality is if people don't do it, if the people at the top aren't also walking the talk, behaving in those ways, driving this themselves, then others underneath them will go, well, it's all well and good having a flexible working policy, but my boss works from 6 in the morning till 10 at night. How can I do that? So it's really important that leaders walk the talk. If they don't do it, your teams are not going to do it. So that's the first thing that needs to be done. Again, it's not about the individual saying, this is what I want. And of course, you should always feel comfortable. You could put your hand up and say, I need this, because we should be in a place where we can have those honest and open conversations with our boss. Otherwise, that relationship doesn't really have any meaning. But more importantly, leaders need to be mindful that this is taking place. Therefore, they need to walk the talk. They need to drive change. And culture change only happens when the leaders do it themselves.
But Kathy, sometimes the situation would be even the leaders, they don't realize this might be a problem. They don't realize working too hard themselves might be a problem. So are there any things, say, an individual employee can do in order to drive some changes in the workplace?
I think it's important to speak up. You can't read someone's mind, right? Not yet. It could be possible to.
Not yet.
Not yet. So unless you speak up and unless you ask for what you want, sometimes people will go, I had no idea that's how you were feeling. I had no idea that's what you wanted. I had no idea that was a priority for you. So I think the most important thing that we could do as individuals is not to be afraid and speak up when we want something. And it's okay to fail. And it's okay to say something that isn't popular. And it's okay to do things that maybe other people are not doing. But that's fine, as long as you're supported by strong leaders who will respect you for doing that. And it's interesting, once you start doing that, others will follow. So I think as women, we need to be confident in ourselves, to feel it's okay to say these things and do these things and not feel threatened that we might have a negative impression on us. With all the work we do around gender, we speak to a lot of very senior women, and we always ask them, what are their keys to success? What is it that gets you to where you are today? And they always say, having strong mentors, having great advocates and sponsors, and thank God for the male allies in Hong Kong who do a brilliant job. Be really strategic about how you network and think about your networks and your ecosystem. And the last thing they talk about is be confident. And if you haven't got the confidence today, it's okay, it will come, because we can't be perfect from day one. So put yourself out there, give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? Someone says no, or you fail. So what?